The first thing my daughter said wasn't, "Are you going to be okay?" It was, "Did the doctor say how much time?" She asked it so quietly that I almost answered without thinking. Instead, I looked at her, really looked at her. Her eyes were wet, her voice was shaking, but there was something else. She wasn't asking if I was dying, she was asking when. I told her the doctors still needed more tests. She wrapped her arms around me and cried into my shoulder. For a second, I almost told her the truth, that I wasn't sick, that the diagnosis was fake, that I only wanted to put one fear to rest. Instead, I hugged her back. She whispered, "I'm going to make sure you're taken care of." Then she walked into my kitchen. A few seconds later, I heard a cabinet close. Then I heard her voice. "Don't tell Michael yet." I stopped in the hallway. "No, he still thinks Dad's changing the will." Another pause. "I know the house's value went up again." She lowered her voice. "If we wait until after the funeral, it'll be easier." My hand tightened around the coffee mug. I wasn't shaking because of what she'd said. I was shaking because she'd already pictured my funeral. I quietly walked back into the living room before she returned. When she sat beside me again, she held my hand. "We're going to get through this." I smiled. "I hope you're right." That was the last honest conversation we had for a while. If you'd asked me a year earlier whether Emily loved me, I would have answered without hesitation. Of course she did. She called every Sunday. She never missed my birthday. After my wife passed away, she came over every Wednesday with dinner. People would have called me lucky. Maybe I was. At least for a while. The change happened so slowly I couldn't point to one day. It started with harmless questions. "Dad, where do you keep the insurance papers?" "Dad, do you still have the original deed?" "Dad, have you updated your beneficiaries recently?" I never thought much about it. My wife handled paperwork for most of our marriage. After she passed, Emily naturally stepped in whenever I needed help filling out forms or organizing files. I trusted her. Why wouldn't I? Then one afternoon she asked something that stayed with me. "If you ever couldn't live alone anymore," she hesitated, "would you rather sell the house or let one of us move in?" I laughed. "I'm still mowing my own lawn." She laughed too. "I know. I'm just thinking ahead." Back then I believed her. Now I know she already was. A few weeks later, my son Michael came by to help me replace the garbage disposal. We spent most of the afternoon under the sink, complaining about whoever invented plumbing. As he packed up his tools, he looked at me. "Dad? Yeah? Has Emily been asking weird questions?" I wiped my hands on an old towel. "What kind of weird questions?" He scratched the back of his neck. "She asked if I'd be willing to let her buy my share of the house." I frowned. "What share?" He gave me a puzzled look. I asked her the same thing. The room got quiet. Finally, he shrugged. "I figured maybe you'd already talked to her." "I haven't." He nodded once. "That's what I thought." After he left, I sat in my recliner staring at the television. It was on. I couldn't tell you what was playing. My wife used to have a habit whenever something bothered her. She'd make tea. Not because tea solved anything, because it gave her 5 quiet minutes to think. Without realizing it, I found myself making tea. I smiled when I caught myself using her favorite mug. Some habits never leave. Neither do certain promises. That night, I opened the small fireproof box in my bedroom closet. Inside were our wills, insurance papers, the deed, a stack of old letters nanowriting, and an envelope in my wife's handwriting. Across the front, she'd written only 6 words. For Richard, open only if necessary. I was sure I'd seen every paper in that box before. I had no memory of that envelope. I stood there holding it, wondering how I'd missed it, wondering whether I was supposed to open it now. I carried the envelope into the kitchen and set it beside my cup of tea. For almost 10 minutes, I just looked at it. My wife's handwriting hadn't changed in the 10 years since she'd been gone. It was still neat, still somehow calming. The words "open only if necessary" kept bothering me. Necessary for what? Finally, I opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter. It wasn't long. She wrote that if I was reading it, something had probably happened that made me question my own judgment. Then one sentence stopped me cold. "If you ever have to choose between believing what someone says and believing what they repeatedly do, believe what they do." I read that line 3 times. Then I folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. I never told anyone I'd found it. Not even Michael. The next morning I called my family attorney. He'd known my wife almost as long as I had. When I walked into his office, he smiled. "I was wondering when I'd see you again. I wish it were under better circumstances." He noticed the envelope in my hand. "Is that Helen's?" I nodded. He didn't ask to read it. Instead, he asked, What do you need from me? I need to know how to protect myself, without accusing my family of something I can't prove. He leaned back in his chair. That's usually the smartest place to start. For the next hour, we talked about trusts, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, and estate planning. Before I left, he said something I wrote down in the parking lot. Don't test people to punish them. Test them because you need the truth. That was exactly why I'd invented the diagnosis. Not to trap Emily, to stop lying to myself. 3 days later, Emily called. Dad, are you home? I am. I made soup. She showed up 20 minutes later carrying 2 containers and a grocery bag. She stocked my refrigerator without asking. She checked the expiration dates on everything. She even replaced the batteries in my smoke detector. If someone had filmed those 2 hours, they would have sworn she was the perfect daughter. As she was leaving, she stopped by the hallway table where I always kept my mail. What are these? She picked up a folder before I could answer. They're from my attorney. She looked up immediately. Attorney? Just updating some paperwork. Oh, she smiled. What kind of paperwork? Nothing exciting, she laughed. You've always hated paperwork. I still do. She nodded. Then she placed the folder back exactly where she'd found it. Or so I thought. After she left, I noticed the papers weren't in the same order. Someone else might not have noticed. I did. Because I'd arranged them alphabetically before she arrived. One page was sticking out farther than the others. She hadn't just picked up the folder. She'd looked inside. I didn't call her. Instead, I did something I'd never done before. I put a small pencil mark on the inside corner of every document in the folder. A habit my attorney had taught me years ago. If you ever need to know whether someone's been through your papers, he'd said, give yourself a way to tell. A week later, Emily came over while I was at my weekly breakfast with Michael. I'd told her she could drop off some photo albums she'd borrowed. When I got home, the albums were sitting on the dining room table. So was the folder. Every paper looked perfectly organized, almost too organized. I opened it. Every single pencil mark had been disturbed. Someone had removed every page, read it, and put it back. She'd been careful, just not careful enough. That evening my phone rang. It was Michael. You busy? Not really. I think you should come over. His voice sounded strange. I drove to his house. He met me in the driveway instead of inviting me inside. I wasn't supposed to hear this, he said. Hear what? He took a deep breath. Emily and Jason were here. I waited. They think you're changing your estate plan. They're right. They're trying to figure out how to stop you. I stared at him. What do you mean, stop me? He looked genuinely uncomfortable. They've been telling people you're getting forgetful. I didn't say a word. He kept going. They said if your memory keeps getting worse, they might need to step in and help manage your finances. The air felt different all of a sudden, not heavier, colder. I wasn't afraid they'd take my money. I was afraid they'd started building a story about me, and stories, especially the believable ones, have a way of spreading before the truth ever gets a chance to catch up. I drove home with the windows down, not because it was warm, because I needed the air. I kept replaying what Michael had said. They're telling people you're getting forgetful. That wasn't just gossip. That was the beginning of a paper trail. If enough people believed I couldn't manage my own affairs, someone could eventually walk into a courtroom and argue they should make decisions for me. Maybe they wouldn't win, but they'd already decided to try. The next morning, I called my attorney before 8. I think it's time, I said. I was expecting your call. By noon, we'd signed new documents. My medical power of attorney went to an independent fiduciary. The person handling my finances, if I ever became incapacitated, would be a licensed professional I'd never met before. Neither of my children would have that authority. Then my attorney suggested one more thing. I want you to schedule a cognitive evaluation. I laughed. I'm not the one with memory problems. I know, he smiled. But let's make sure nobody can ever say you are. A week later, I spent nearly 3 hours with a neurologist. Memory tests. Problem solving. Attention exercises. At the end, the doctor smiled. I wish everyone your age scored this well. He handed me a signed report. No evidence of cognitive impairment. I put it in my attorney's file. I hoped I'd never need it. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, my neighbor Carol knocked on my door. She looked uncomfortable. Can I ask you something? Of course. She hesitated. Are you moving into assisted living? I blinked. No. She looked relieved. Oh, I only asked because Emily told a few of us you were having trouble remembering things. There it was. The story had already left the family. I thanked Carol, closed the door, and for the first time since my wife died, I cried. Not for long, maybe a minute. It wasn't because my daughter wanted the house. It was because she'd traded my reputation for a better chance at getting it. That was the part I couldn't understand. The tears stopped as quickly as they came. When I looked up, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked tired, not defeated, just finished pretending. That afternoon I called Emily. Would you and Jason come over Sunday? Sure. Michael too? Of course. I have something important to share. She asked if it was about my health. I said yes. That wasn't entirely a lie. On Sunday, everyone arrived right on time. Emily brought pie. Jason carried a bottle of wine. Michael showed up empty-handed, just like he always did. After dinner, I asked everyone to sit down. I placed one folder in front of each person. Emily smiled nervously. What's all this? My diagnosis. She reached for my hand. I gently pulled it back. Then I opened my folder. There never was one. Silence. I've never had cancer. Nobody moved. I've never had a terminal illness. Emily's face lost every bit of color. She couldn't finish. I made it up. Jason leaned back in his chair. You lied to us? I did. I looked directly at him. And because I lied, I learned the truth. I slid copies of the real estate inquiry across the table. The title company request. The security camera stills, the brochure, the notes from my attorney. Then I placed the neurologist's report on top. I've also never had memory problems. Emily looked down at the report, then back at me. She whispered, Who told you? I didn't need anyone to tell me. I looked at her. Your neighbors did. Nobody spoke. Finally, Jason broke the silence. We were desperate. No. I shook my head. You were impatient. Emily started crying. Real tears this time. I kept telling myself we were planning ahead. You stopped planning. I answered quietly. You started counting. I handed Emily one last envelope. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single page. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a legal notice. It was a copy of my wife's letter. The line she'd written years earlier was highlighted. Believe what people repeatedly do, not what they repeatedly say. Emily covered her mouth. I forgot who you raised me to be. I nodded. So did I. Then I stood up. The trust is finalized. The house can't be sold because of pressure. No one controls my finances. And if anyone ever files a petition claiming I'm mentally incompetent, I tapped the neurologist's report. They'll lose before they walk into court. Nobody argued. There was nothing left to argue. Emily asked if she could hug me. I told her not today. She nodded. I understand. It took almost a year before I was ready to meet her for breakfast. Then another 6 months before I gave her a key to the house again. Not because she asked, because she stopped asking. She earned it back one ordinary Saturday at a time. Last Christmas, my youngest granddaughter taped a drawing to my refrigerator. It was a picture of the house, the yellow kitchen, the old oak tree, me standing on the porch. Across the top she'd written, in the uneven handwriting only a child has, Grandpa's house. Not our future house, just Grandpa's house. I smiled every time I walked past it, because somewhere along the way, my daughter finally learned the difference.